But yeah, I'm just asking you, why, if you regret doing it and think you shouldn't have done it and you're going to do something different, why not just say, really sorry, shouldn't have done that?
Well, notwithstanding that journalists will always tempt us to put words in our mouth, I think we're at liberty to choose the way we express ourselves. We've been very clear it was a mistake and it's something we regret, and we're moving forward to correct it. I think it is right to say that we want a system which is sustainable, and that means absolutely rigorous on standards and enforcement, but also fair. I don't think in any other walk of life professionally, you wouldn't have a system with at least some right of appeal. So I think those things are important. The mistake was to conflate that with an individual case, and we accept that.
OK, well, I'm still a bit confused that the Prime Minister couldn't attend the debate after his visit to that hospital, given that he was able to get a private jet from the COP26 summit in Glasgow down for a private dinner with a mate of his at the Garrick Club at the weekend. But there we are. You say you want it to be rigorous on standards and you want it to be fair. So what would that involve? Would it be extending the rule now, which is what quite clearly Owen Paterson had been found guilty of lobbying, being paid by a private company to lobby whilst as an MP? Would you want to extend it so that no MP could have a second job, no MP could do any advisory work? What would you be looking at?
Well, these are ultimately the regulation of these matters for the House of Commons, but we have the Committee on Standards, and the specific issue that, of course, we were debating in recent days has been whether there should be a right of appeal and whether the due process is right. And I think it's right to try and work through the committee and have a cross-party basis for that, and that's what we'll do. And actually there was some fairly positive contributions on all sides of the House in relation to that yesterday in the debate.
The front page of one of the papers today has Geoffrey Cox. He's a top QC. He's the former Attorney General. And he apparently has spent an awful lot of the last year working in the British Virgin Islands, defending them against corruption allegations. He's paid £1 million. He was even, when we were in lockdown, when I believe we weren't allowed to travel out of the country, he was able to travel abroad and was working in the British Virgin Islands, earning that money instead of working full-time for his constituents at a very difficult time. Should he resign?
We've got a system in place with declaration of any outside earnings. I think that's crucially important because it leads to the second thing, which is notwithstanding whether the rules are being complied with, ultimately voters in any constituency for any MP need to decide whether they think that their MP is representing them adequately and has got the right priorities. I think that's the right thing for Geoffrey, but for myself, for all MPs.
So it's absolutely fine for an MP that's elected to represent their constituents to basically have another completely full-time job on the other side of the world, earning vastly more money, and you're still thinking, as far as you're concerned, yep, they're doing a perfectly good job and not a problem.
No, I think that contradicts exactly what I said, which is that it's not for me to start making these judgment calls if the rules have been complied with, but what it is for the voters of any MP to look very carefully at the record of their representative, decide how and where they've been spending their time and the extent to which they've been representing them, and make those judgment calls. That's ultimately, in a democracy, though that accountability is at the ballot box, and I think with the relevant rules on transparency, that's the right way to go.
Are you concerned? I mean, is there regret that you and Steve Barclay have both used that term, not the word sorry, but the regret? Does that actually concern really the fact that this has blown up in the government's face, particularly in Boris Johnson's face? They've gone below. Extraordinary poll showing that Labour are actually ahead, just one poll so far, but who knows how many, that Labour are ahead of the Tories. And you've blown up that big poll lead and angered a lot of the red wall voters that put you into power back in December 2019 by appearing to, endorse what was, frankly, sleazy behaviour by Owen Paterson. Is that where the regret stems from?
No, but the regret stems from the fact that I recognise, and I think the government as a whole recognises, as Steve said yesterday, that conflating two issues, an individual case with all the factual circumstances pertaining to it, with the question of the procedure and the process, those things should have been kept separate. So we recognise that was a mistake. We regret it, and we're working on a cross-party basis, and MPs in the Committee on Standards do so to try and make sure we've got the most robust, but also most sustainable system going forward.
OK, let's move on to COVID issues. Given that we have seen 16 days now of COVID cases going down, concertedly, before half-term, during half-term and since half-term, and we've seen cases go up and down twice now since we've had no restrictions pretty much in England at all, despite other countries in the United Kingdom having mask mandates, vaccine passports and the like. Have we now made it really clear that we do not need these sort of measures like mask mandates, like vaccine passports, in order for us to control COVID? And can the government now rule out that we will ever need to have any of those restrictions on our lives again?
Well, Jude, I think what it demonstrates crystal clear is the success of the vaccine rollout. And we're, in particular now, with the very high levels of double vaccination and even higher levels of single vaccination, we're making sure that the booster program is rolled out, 10 million so far. I think that's absolutely critically important. As you know, there's always been a plan B to look at things like working from home and masks, but we've got no plans to introduce it because of the success of Plan A. But of course, we keep that under review. We're vigilant about it because we're going through these colder winter months now, where the NHS comes under more strain and when the vaccine can spread more easily.
But you say, of course, you keep it there, sort of, in the back of the book. We may need to use this. Given that we've actually done better in England than Wales and Scotland have done on cases, despite not having vaccine passports, despite not having mask mandates, does that not show that those measures do not actually have any relevance? They are simply restrictions on people's lives and freedoms without actually having any benefit. Why are these things still being held over us when there is no evidence that these things actually make any difference?
Sorry, in fairness to you, I don't think that's quite right. The Plan B hasn't been put in place, so none of those restrictions are currently in place. The question is whether...
But the cases have gone down anyway. But the cases, but in Scotland and Wales, where they have had a mask mandate and vaccine passports, their cases are higher in one case.
Well, I think what it shows you is the efficiency, the effectiveness of the rollout of the vaccine. I think the government, those on the front line, those that have been distributing it have done a great job. And also, we've got through some of the vaccine hesitancy. More people have the confidence. That's why Plan B hasn't been needed. And I think you're right to say that the better we do with the vaccine programme, the less likely it is to be required.
No, I'm saying that Plan B, we've already proven the point that Plan B will never be needed. We've got the vaccines. We can see cases going down without any restrictions on our lives whatsoever. Why then would we ever need Plan B?
I think it's worth, if one thing we've learned through the course of the pandemic is to make sure that you've got contingency plans in place, even if you don't need them. So you're absolutely right that we've made great progress. I think it's right to acknowledge that. The booster program going into the colder months, crucially important. That's where big area of focus is. But and the more success we have, the less likely it is that Plan B would ever need to be considered to be introduced. And that's where we are.
Just finally, very quickly, the NHS England Chief Executive Amanda Pritchard at the weekend claimed that we have 14 times the number of people in hospital with COVID right now than we saw this time last year. That's simply not true. We have far fewer people in hospital right now than we had last year. She was out by a factor of about 143,000. But does it worry you that the person in charge of keeping the NHS functioning is someone who doesn't actually know how many people are in hospital with COVID?
Oh, look, I pay tribute to all of those who are working in the NHS, doing a heroic job. You're quite right to challenge us on data and figures. I think the cases have clearly come down. And I think overall, in relation to deaths and hospitalisations, if you look from where we are now, back to the peak, we're clearly in a very different position. But I also think it's right to say, as NHS is wanting us to do as we go through the colder months, just to keep being vigilant. We wouldn't want to slip up as we come through, if you like, the last furlong of this very desperate period that has been characterised by the pandemic. So it's right to stay vigilant. But look, we're on the right track and we just need to keep getting people vaccinated and the boosters rolled out.
OK, Dominic Raab, Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, really appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much indeed.